I want you to imagine dusting off an ancient text, like 5,000 years old.
Right, really ancient.
Yeah. You open it up, and at first glance, it sounds exactly like what you'd expect. A sweeping, mythological epic.
Gods and monsters, basically.
Exactly. A cosmic battle between divine beings and terrifying monsters. But as you keep reading, the mythology kind of fades.
It shifts completely.
It really does. You realize you aren't reading about ancient history or supernatural beings at all. You are reading a hyper-accurate, totally clinical diagnostic manual for modern human psychology.
Which is wild to think about.
Right. And it perfectly maps out your own existential anxiety. Okay, let's unpack this, because today's deep dive is all about Chapter 16 of the Bhagavad Gita.
Also known as the Daivasura Sampad Vibhaga Yoga.
Yeah, the yoga of the division between divine and demoniac qualities. Our mission today is to unpack this ancient psychological map, to understand the two opposing forces operating inside all of us.
And how they dictate our freedom or our suffering.
Exactly. And, how we can practically tip the scales in our favor.
Yeah.
But before we can figure out what this manual is actually diagnosing, we have to completely strip away our modern pop culture understanding of the words demons and gods.
We really do, because when we hear those terms today, we immediately externalize them.
Like little guys with pitchforks.
Right. We picture beings on clouds or monsters under the bed. But Chapter 16 of the Gita is explicitly internal. It presents a core dualistic framework of human nature.
Which is what?
It's the Daivi, or divine nature, versus the Asuri, which is the demoniac nature. These aren't entities out in the world. They are the operating systems running in the background of your mind.
Just dictating how you function.
Exactly. And they're dictated by what are known as the gunas, or the fundamental qualities of nature.
Right. And understanding how these gunas actually work mechanically is crucial here.
Definitely.
So the divine temperament is fueled by sattva, which is essentially cognitive clarity and goodness.
Pure awareness, yeah.
But the demoniac nature is driven by this chaotic mix of rajas and tamas.
And we should clarify what those mean.
Yeah, so rajas isn't just passion in a romantic sense. It's that aggressive, restless ambition, like the stuff that keeps you staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. because your mind just will not shut off.
We've all been there.
Oh, absolutely. And then tamas is cognitive inertia. It's the deep lethargy, ignorance, and delusion.
Which physically manifests today as burnout.
Right.
Or depressive stagnation.
Exactly. It is the literal physics of human behavior.
And modern psychology categorizes these exact azuric or, demonic traits simply as ego-driven impulsivity or toxic personality patterns that lead to self-sabotage.
Yeah, you are either operating from a place of clear, untethered awareness, which is sattva, or you are being yanked around by aggressive desires and exhausting brain fog.
That's a great way to put it.
But I'll be honest, calling my bad habits demonic feels a bit melodramatic.
It sounds a bit intense.
It does. It sounds like ancient scare tactics to just keep people in line. And on the flip side, this framework refers to the divine qualities as sampad, which literally translates to wealth.
Right, divine wealth.
Yeah, so why use such extreme mythological and financial language if we're essentially just talking about, impulse control and good habits?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the language is entirely literal within this framework. The text uses the word wealth because these positive psychological traits function as actual spiritual capital.
Spiritual capital. Okay, explain that.
So, character is not a static trait. It is biological and psychological momentum. Every action you take, every single thought you entertain leaves a samskara.
A samskara, that's like a groove, right?
Exactly, a deep impression or groove in your mind. And over time, these grooves dictate your automatic responses. Every time you act out of sattva, you are carving a healthy groove.
So you're basically making a deposit.
Yes, you're making a deposit into an account that ultimately buys your moksha, your liberation from suffering.
Wow. So the negative traits aren't just mistakes. They are compounding psychological debts.
They absolutely are.
Every time you give in to that rajasic aggression or tamasic lethargy, you are digging the groove deeper. You're just trapping yourself in the cycle of your own making.
Which is why the term wealth is so appropriate.
Right. So if these divine qualities are our capital, we really need to know what this wealth actually looks like in practice, because we need to audit our accounts, basically.
We do. And there are 26 specific qualities of this divine wealth listed right at the beginning of the chapter.
Well, there's a lot to remember.
It is, but they fall into 3 very practical buckets. The first bucket revolves around personal development.
Like the inner bedrock.
Exactly. the stuff you cultivate in solitude. This includes things like fearlessness, purity of mind, and a steadfastness and self-knowledge.
Got it.
You are basically building an internal architecture that doesn't just collapse when the external world gets chaotic.
Okay, so that's bucket one. And then the framework moves outward into how we maintain relationships with the world around us.
Right, the social aspect.
Yeah. This is where we see non-injury, truthfulness, and an absolute absence of anger. And truthfulness here isn't just, refusing to lie.
It's deeper than that.
It is an active, unflinching alignment with reality. And an absence of anger isn't about just suppressing rage until you eventually explode.
Because that never works.
No, it doesn't. It's about reaching a psychological state where your ego isn't so fragile that it constantly perceives other people's actions as a personal attack.
And that lack of fragility is what makes the third bucket, which is repairing relationships, possible.
Right, repairing what's broken.
This is where we find fortitude and forgiveness. And the mechanics of forgiveness here are just remarkable. There's this concept in the sources of forgiving someone 70 times 7.
Which is, what, 490 times?
Exactly, 490 times. And the underlying mechanism there is pure neuroplasticity.
How so?
Well, by the time you have consciously forced yourself to override your reactive, vindictive impulses 490 times, total forgiveness has simply become a hardened habit.
You've literally carved a new groove.
Yes. You have physically rewired your brain's default setting from retaliation to compassion.
That is incredible. But I do have a major problem with how this applies in the real world, though.
Oh, what's that?
Well, we have to remember the context of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is speaking to Arjuna, who is a warrior. And he's literally standing on a battlefield, moments away from a massive, violent war.
The battle of Kurukshetra.
Right. Telling a soldier to be fearless makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But telling a warrior to simultaneously practice non-injury and an absence of anger while fighting an army, that is a massive paradox.
It definitely sounds like one.
Like, how do you fight a war without anger or injury?
Well, it looks like a paradox until we look at the mechanics of the ego. True non-injury, ahimsa, and profound forgiveness require immense internal strength.
Not weakness.
Exactly. It's a near-total reduction of the ego. It is the exact opposite of physical weakness or being a doormat. In this framework, fearlessness is the absence of existential fear.
What does that mean exactly? Existential fear.
It is the eradication of the terror that comes from thinking you are nothing more than your physical body and your social status.
Oh, wow. Okay, so when you are no longer terrified of losing your ego, you can actually act with perfect emotional regulation.
And precisely. Arjuna is being instructed to do his duty to stand up against injustice.
But to do so with, surgical precision?
Right. Without the toxic, blinding hatred that usually fuels violence, the action arises from clarity, not from being emotionally triggered.
Okay, that makes so much sense.
Exactly the point. He is being asked to act from sattva. Because when the ego is fully in the driver's seat, completely unchecked by that clarity, we enter the downward spiral of the Asuri nature.
The demonic nature.
Right. And the framework pulls no punches in diagnosing the worldview of a mind dominated by this state. These individuals operate from a deeply cynical baseline.
Like a total lack of belief in anything higher.
Yes. They believe the universe is entirely random, devoid of any moral foundation or higher order, and driven exclusively by base biological urges and consumption.
So because they believe life is just a random collision of atoms meant for sensory pleasure, they become desperate to consume as much as possible before the clock runs out.
It's an exhausting way to live.
Totally. The text describes this state as being bound by 100 shackles of hope and innumerable cares that only end in death. That is a clinical description of modern materialistic anxiety.
It really is.
When your entire identity is tied to what you can consume and control, you become a psychological hostage to your own desires. And this framework maps out the trap, using 3 absolute danger zones.
The 3 gates to hell.
Yeah, the 3 gates to hell: lust, anger, and greed.
Kama, Krodha, and Lobha. And these aren't just arbitrary sins, they are a mechanical chain reaction.
A chain reaction. How does that work?
Well, lust is the baseline, the insatiable, agonizing desire to acquire something. When that desire is inevitably thwarted by reality, the friction turns the lust into anger.
Okay, that makes sense. You don't get what you want, you get mad.
Right. But what happens if the desire is actually fulfilled?
You're happy.
No, it mutates into greed. It's the terrifying realization that the object didn't bring lasting peace, so you frantically hunger for even more.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because looking at the mechanics of these three gates, this is the exact algorithm of a highly addictive social media app.
Oh, that is a fantastic comparison.
Think about it. First, the platform utilizes lust. It hopes your baseline desires by showing you lifestyles you want, things you covet.
Just manufacturing a sense of inadequacy so you desire more?
Exactly. Then, to maximize your time on the platform, it actively provokes your anger. It feeds you polarizing, outrageous content because fury is the highest engagement metric for the human nervous system.
It keeps you scrolling.
Right. And finally, it relies on greed. The infinite scroll. There's no bottom to the feed. You just want one more hit of dopamine, one more video. Lust, anger, greed.
We carry a machine in our pockets designed to put us in this exact psychological loop.
It's terrifying.
It is the identical feedback loop. In fact, verse 14 of this chapter actually quotes the internal monologue of a mind trapped in this azuric cycle.
What does it say?
It sounds just like someone completely isolated by their own ego. The internal monologue says, I am the DOS, I am the enjoyer, I am perfect, powerful, and happy. This enemy has been slain by me, and others also I shall destroy.
Wow. That's just pure delusion.
Exactly. That delusion of absolute superiority cuts the individual off from everyone else. They are trapped in an echo chamber, frantically trying to control a universe they believe is meaningless.
And that profound state of internal friction, the endless hunger and isolation, is what the framework labels as hell.
Yes, that internal suffering is hell.
But the use of the word hell brings up a massive contradiction for me.
How so?
The text talks about these ego-driven individuals being cast into hell or thrown into demonic wombs. If this is supposed to be an empowering psychological map, permanent damnation feels completely contradictory.
I see what you mean.
Like, are we saying that if the neural grooves of lust and anger get too deep, a person is permanently doomed?
No, not at all. We have to translate the concept of hell out of the Western medieval understanding.
Okay, so it's not fire and brimstone forever.
Right. In this philosophical tradition, hell is absolutely not eternal damnation. The concept of permanent, irreversible punishment simply does not exist here.
That's a huge relief. So what is it then?
Hell is a temporary state. It is an existential reality or specific psychological environment that a soul enters purely for the purpose of correction.
Correction. Like a rehab center.
Yes. It is a mechanism to exhaust the heavy, toxic momentum created by deeply harmful actions.
So it's essentially a cosmic hospital for the soul, a place to burn off the infection of the ego.
Exactly. Even in those lowest states, the divine presence is still acting as the underlying architecture, waiting for the fever to break.
That's fascinating.
There's this concept of integral transformation by the philosopher Sri Aurobindo. He argues that no matter how deep into that azuric, algorithm-driven state you fall, the door is never locked from the outside.
You can always get out.
You can always evolve your consciousness back toward clarity. The fundamental nature of the mind is that it can be rewired.
But if it's just a temporary environment for healing, why use such terrifying apocalyptic imagery? Like, the framework talks about throwing souls into an ocean of material existence.
It sounds harsh.
It sounds like pure fear-mongering designed to terrify people into behaving.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the severe imagery isn't a threat. It is a stark medical reality.
What medical reality?
Think about a severe physical trauma. If a bone heals completely shattered and misaligned, a surgeon cannot just put a cast on it and hope for the best.
Oh, right. They have to re-break the bone.
Exactly. The surgeon has to actively re-break it. It requires painful, radical violence to the body to correct the alignment.
That makes sense.
Similarly, a severely calcified ego that is actively causing harm to itself and others cannot be fixed with gentle affirmations. It requires a drastic, high-friction environment to shatter those destructive neural grooves.
So the suffering experienced in that hellish state isn't a punishment from a vindictive universe.
No, not at all.
The suffering is the friction of the cure. The pain is the symptom of the ego breaking apart.
You nailed it.
Okay, so the intense suffering is just the symptom of an overgrown ego collapsing under its own weight. I mean, I would vastly prefer to skip that surgical process entirely.
Wouldn't we all?
Yeah. So if we want to actively avoid the friction of the three gates, lust, anger, and greed, we need a reliable way to navigate.
And the framework provides a very specific structural solution for this.
Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle.
It does. The culmination of the chapter introduces the concept of Shastra, or scriptural injunctions.
Rules, basically.
Right. The final verses explicitly state that casting aside these ordinances and acting purely on the impulse of your own desires leads to failure, lack of peace, and ultimately that high-friction suffering.
Now, the word scripture immediately implies rigid dogma that just restricts personal freedom.
For a lot of people, yes.
But looking at it through this psychological lens, the boundaries of Shastra aren't arbitrary rules meant to oppress you. Relying on your own unchecked ego for ethical direction is mechanically impossible.
It really
It's
is.
like a corrupt policeman handing a loaded gun to a convict and expecting him to police himself. The ego cannot regulate the ego.
Because it will always justify its own lust, anger, and greed. It is a fundamental conflict of interest.
Right.
If your stated goal is to transcend your desires, you cannot use your desires as your compass. Spiritual growth requires a profound acceptance of exactly who we are in this moment, combined with the structured expectation provided by Shastra to rise higher.
Because you need that external standard.
Exactly. The scriptures act as an external, objective standard of truth that is completely unaffected by your momentary emotional weather.
So what does this all mean? When we talk about these strict boundaries, it's not a cage.
No, not a cage at all.
It's more like the physical constraints of a musical instrument.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, like if a guitar doesn't have a rigid fretboard and tightly tuned strings, if the strings just flop around and do whatever they want, it just makes chaotic noise.
Just a mess of sound.
Right. The strict boundaries, the immense tension of the strings, are what actually allow you to create music. You need the constraint to get the freedom.
That is perfectly stated.
Without the rigid boundaries of Shastra, you aren't free. You're just paralyzed by the endless noise of your own chaotic impulses.
That tension is exactly where liberation happens. True freedom isn't the ability to do whatever you want, whenever you want. That is just being a biological hostage to your appetites.
Exactly.
True freedom is the ability to choose the good, to act from sattva, completely unbothered by the algorithmic pull of the ego. But this raises an important question regarding how we actually live this out.
Because we aren't living in ancient times.
Right. We are navigating a hyper-connected, sensory-overloaded digital age, not an ancient battlefield. How do we apply these constraints?
I think it requires an active daily audit of your own internal operating system. You have to look at those 26 traits of divine wealth and aggressively question your own motives.
Every single day.
Yeah. Like when you open your phone, are you feeding the algorithm of lust, anger, and greed? Or are you setting a rigid boundary to protect the tension of your own mind? You have to make the unconscious grooves conscious.
The battlefield of Kurukshetra, where this entire dialogue took place, is ultimately the battlefield of human attention and volition.
It really is an internal war.
The framework provides the structural physics of how the mind works, but you still have to fight the daily battle of choosing your own clarity over your own conditioning.
It's a relentless practice. So looking back at our journey today, we've taken this ancient text and completely demystified the concepts of demons and gods,
Revealing them to be a highly practical, mechanical map of our own psychological landscape.
We've audited our spiritual capital through the lens of those 26 qualities. Learning that forgiveness isn't just a nice idea, it's a neurological muscle you can train until it becomes your default setting.
Through pure neuroplasticity.
Yeah. And we've exposed the mechanical trap of lust, anger, and greed that hijacks our attention. And finally, we discovered how ancient, seemingly rigid boundaries actually serve as the very tension required to produce modern psychological freedom.
Leave the mythology behind, and what you're left with is the pure physics of human suffering and human liberation.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. Chapter 16 explicitly warns us that the demoniacal worldview is one that sees the universe as completely random, devoid of meaning, and driven solely by base biological urges and infinite consumption.
A completely material view.
Right. Now look at the broader trends of our modern hyper-materialistic world today. A world optimized by algorithms for endless engagement, instant gratification, and continuous outrage.
It's all around us.
Are we, as a global society, actively engineering a culture that inherently breeds the exact isolation, anxiety, and azuric suffering the Bhagavad Gita diagnosed 5,000 years ago? Think about that as you go about your day. Because it turns out that dusty old diagnostic manual wasn't predicting the future. It was trying to hand us the cure before we even realized we were sick.